Hello everyone, welcome to today's Wellbeing session, brought to you by, of course, by the Australian Olympic Committee and Allianz. I'm Amy Jones, I'm a 2008 Beijing water polo Olympian. So today we're here to talk about inclusion in sport. We're also here to celebrate diversity. Firstly, though, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. They're the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge the 60 known Indigenous Australian Olympians. So, Australia, it's an incredibly diverse country. We are a population who share all kinds of faith, gender, sexuality, race, language, culture, you name it, the many characteristics that make us us, and isn't that just fantastic? We know from our most recent census some of the statistics. We know that almost a third, so 29.3% of Australians were born overseas. We know that 18% of Australians have a disability, and we know that 3.2% of Australians identify as First Nations peoples. When it comes to sport, we don't always see that diversity of the Australian population reflected. Pleasingly, at the most recent Summer Olympics and Paralympics in Tokyo, we saw that 53.7% of the Australian Olympic team were female, so that was a record high. We saw another record 16 Indigenous Australian athletes competing. At the Paralympics in Tokyo, we saw the largest ever team sent by Australia. And we also saw a record number of female participants at the broader Paralympic Games, which was up almost 11% from the Rio Games. So some of the numbers are heading in the right direction. We are making progress, but I think we can all agree that there's still a way to go. And that's what we're here to explore today. I would like to acknowledge my own privilege in that I don't have a great deal of lived experience in this domain, and I'm so happy to be joined on stage by four amazing people today who I know will add a lot of depth and insight to this conversation. So without further delay, I would like to invite our guest today to introduce themselves. Peter, let's start with you.
Hi everyone. I'm Peter Boll, two-time Australian Olympian, Commonwealth representative, and yeah, I'm born and raised in Sudan, relocated to Australia at the age of 10, and I've been here for about 19 years now, and it's amazing to see how much has happened in those 19 years, and being part of these communities is unreal. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this.
Amazing. Over to you, Hannah.
Thank you. Hi everyone. Hannah Davis, Beijing 2008 and London 2012 Olympian in sprint canoe kayak. Born and bred South Australian, very proud of it, but have been living in Sydney now for nearly 10 years. And I also would like to acknowledge my position of privilege. I also don't have much lived experience in this domain, but have spent a number of years engaging and working with and supporting these communities, and would like to also acknowledge and pay my respects to the Gadigal of the Eora Nation and this wonderful land that we're all coming together on today, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander athletes actually around the country who just continue to give us so much in that domain. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Hannah.
I'm Madison, Rozario. I'm a Paralympian. I primarily race marathons and longer distances, so I've been to 4 Paralympic Games, and the changes that I've been able to see in this space since I was 14 has been absolutely unreal, and a panel like this just wouldn't have happened in 2008 when I started, so it's amazing to see how far it's come, and this is exciting to be a part of.
Hi everyone, I'm Dellacqua, 2008 and 2012 Olympian in tennis. I now currently am the Women and Girls Lead at Tennis New South Wales. I also do some work in player relations at Tennis Australia. So now really engaged in this space, in the I&D space. So really excited to be here with such a wonderful group of people here on stage, and happy to, really happy to share some insights and have a conversation today. It's exciting.
Thank you, and a huge welcome to you all. 2 quick things before I launch into my first question. The guest today, everyone here is to speak to their own beliefs, their own experiences, and we're so grateful for that. No one is speaking on behalf of any particular organisation that they work for, so let's keep this a really friendly and open space from which we can all learn and grow from today. Secondly, you will have the chance to ask your own questions a little bit later in the session today. So if you're joining us online, you can add them to the comments section on the stream that you're watching from. If you're here in person, just remember them, and I'll prompt you a little bit later on. So questions are welcome. Now, I wanted to kick off today by firstly talking about the word inclusion, because it can be a big word, it can mean lots of different things to different people, and particularly when we're talking about the context of sport. So, Casey, I might start with you. What does inclusion in sport look like, feel like? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think I always like to use the word sport is for all, because sport really truly is for all, and I think there's no more sense of belonging than sport can bring together the different groups of people. I guess for me, having lived experience in the LGBTQ space as well, perhaps, I think sport has always, and having had role models and trailblazers within my sport, I've always just felt a sense of belonging and a sense of community, and having a positive experience in that regard, I think has always made me feel, I guess, really included. But now also working outside of the sport in terms of on the ground and I guess front-facing in the sport, sport should be a place that people walk into a club or an association or a community and feel like they just are welcomed and they're included and they're a part of that community. So I think, that's, I guess, what sport means, inclusion in sport means for me.
Fantastic. Maddie?
I think sport is often kind of very representative of communities. It's almost like a mirror that we can hold up to what the real world is doing. And so I think when we notice shortcomings in sport, they're very likely happening outside of sport. And that's something that goes that way, but it also goes the other, in that sport has a responsibility to be an example of what we need to be doing in order to actually impact change further than that. And I feel like sport is one of the most pervasive industries that we have, and that whether we're participating as athletes or in administration or just spectators of it, it's completely inescapable. And so what we do in sport actually has an enormous impact on the larger community, and sport exists to serve communities. And I think oftentimes we do forget that when we're making decisions around genuine, authentic diversity within sport, but the role sport plays and therefore the responsibility that it has is enormous. So I think it's more than just in sport, it definitely has impact further than that.
Very true. I like what you said about it being a mirror for the rest of society. Hannah?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with these comments, and maybe to add further to Maddie's point around that mirroring, I'd like to take inclusion to that next step where we're also truly integrating. So yes, there are opportunities to participate and attend, but we need to ensure that that inclusion is extending to those who are making the decisions. So the conversations around decision-making processes, that mirror is being reflected in those processes as well. So yes, we've got different communities represented on the field, in the games, but also behind the scenes. So where a lot of that cultural shift happens is also reflective of society.
Indeed. And Peter?
I guess for me, from my own personal experience, just to add on to everything, moving to Australia, sports was like a universal language, especially when you go to school and you can't speak the language, like science and all those classes made no sense. But for sports, it just made sense. All the rules were the same, and it didn't matter where you're from. It didn't matter who was playing. The rules just stayed consistent, stayed the same, and that's for me. That's what inclusion is. And to add more to that, I think it's I'd combine it with opportunity, because, of course, you feel included, you feel a sense of belonging, but you need the opportunity to be there. Everyone deserves the same opportunity to participate in the sport, and further to that, everyone, I guess, deserves to know of opportunities. Because for me, starting athletics, to be honest, when I was 16 and my teacher approached me, I was like thinking, like, what is she talking about? Like, why? Who runs for a living? That's not a sport. Back then, like running was just like a foundation to every single sport that I played. Like, you needed to be fit, you needed to be that. Just like English was a foundation to go to, and then once you went to science, it made sense. And then I was just like, man, if I can get that opportunity, someone else deserves that opportunity at the same time. There's, no matter what the results are, it's just everyone deserves that opportunity to be included in it.
The great themes there I picked up: representation, a feeling, a community, impact, and a common language. So I think that's a really great platform to go on from. I'm keen to hear, have you always felt included in sport? And you've all risen to the tops of your sports. Were there any, I guess, if not, were there any challenges that you found along the way? And Peter, for example, you said you didn't pick up athletics until you were 16. So when did that sense of inclusion really kick in for you? We have so many different communities. Like through my school community, I felt like my teacher played a massive role to give me
give me the opportunity and say, like, you can do it, and further on, like, I could help you get to that club, and then you join a club, and then when I went to my first Olympic, I'm like, whoa, like, I'm wearing the Australian team, like, I'm a part of a bigger community, wider community. So I've always kind of felt included, but I knew if it wasn't for the steps taken earlier on, I would have never even got the opportunity to be in that space. Like, I mean, like 18 years ago, I was an Australian citizen. 18 years on, you're representing Australia in 2 Olympic Games, but in that middle, someone had to give you that opportunity, and it was a teacher. Like, because our background, we don't understand. Our parents usually come and they're kind of busy trying to make a life, understand the culture. So we don't understand that there's a club outside of school. And I think if we can focus on that, trying to make sure everyone's aware, it'd make a lot of difference.
So having someone really kind of champion, I guess, your involvement. I want to come back to that. But talking about that feeling of inclusion in sport, I'd love to just hear, even briefly, from everyone here. Have you always felt included in your sports? Hannah, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, my journey is an interesting one. I started in surf lifesaving in South Australia and came from a community club there that felt like home. I was safe there, I was supported there, and really started to develop my sense of self and confidence. And it was with the backing of that community that I could pursue my dreams in the sport of sprint kayaking that found me at the age of 16. So similarly, like I hadn't even sat in a boat until then and thought, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? But had that community behind me, and that sense of belonging. And when you've got that body of like belief sitting behind you, regardless of what your other circumstances are, it's really, really powerful. So I have felt that I've wanted to be able to contribute back, having been the beneficiary, how bad's that, of such a wonderful platform to be launched off. I think, why isn't that same platform afforded to everyone, whether you then want to pursue that pursuit of high performance sport or not, or you simply want to be involved in community sport? Why shouldn't that opportunity be afforded? So yes, I've been quite fortunate. I have felt included for the most parts. I think as a female in sport, we certainly have our own unique experiences, and I've always been willing to sort of put my hand up and try and tackle some of those head on. I've had wonderful trailblazers ahead of me, sort of setting the direction, and hopefully I've been able to inspire some of the generations that have followed me too.
Those trailblazers, so important.
So important. And I just think what they were able to overcome in an era where the gender divide was even greater is phenomenal. So,
Maddie, who was your trailblazer? Who I guess was that person that I guess brought you into the sport? Because you didn't pick up wheelchair sports until you were a teenager, 11 or 12?
So 11 or 12. I mean, she's watching right now on the live stream, but Louise Savage was definitely the person for me. But kind of adding on to what Peter was saying, I think when you add a Paralympic lens to what inclusion in sport looks like, you're adding a whole new dimension of complication to that narrative. So I remember finding wheelchair racing when I was 11 or 12. And that was the first time in my life that I felt like I belonged somewhere. I was suddenly in a world that was designed for someone that looked like me by people that looked like me. And that had never happened to me before in my life. And I didn't realize it was missing until I found sport. I had an incredible family, so I never felt like I was different or other. I have 2 sisters, and we are all within 3 years of each other. We did everything together. So I never had those moments of feeling excluded, but it wasn't until I found sport that I realized that I was living in a world that was not designed for me by any means, and it was sport that allowed me to find that. But Paralympic sport is really complicated in that I can go from having an interaction with someone who's watched the Paralympics and has recognized me in the street and has stopped me to tell me the impact that something I've done has had on them. And then 2 seconds later, I can be getting in my car and be met with pity by someone who's trying to help me get in my car because this poor disabled girl can't do this. And so while you feel this inclusion in sport in certain spaces, it's not necessarily translating 100% just yet. And I find that as a woman in sport as well. And so there's a lot of intersection kind of happening in that conversation. And so sport kind of gave me almost the tools to be able to create that world wherever I went outside of this space that was made for me. And I think we do this as women a lot as well, where you find a place that works and is comfortable, and you kind of you step into your power in that space. and then you're able to design it as you leave and demand it as you leave that space and carry that. And I think that's one of the reasons that sport for girls and sport for people with disabilities and sport for any kind of minority is so incredibly important, because it allows you to find your identity with a purpose that is sport, and it shapes it. And so for me, yeah, the sport was definitely the most included I've ever felt, but it also showed me how contrasting that actually was to the rest of my life.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. But you're right in that I think everyone would agree sport is such a powerful force for positive change, for social cohesion, all of those things. Casey, how about you? Tell us about tennis. What's the environment like? Would you say that you've always felt that it's been an inclusive environment in your sport?
Yeah, look, I grew up in Perth and I grew up at a community club, and my mum and my nan were both local tennis players. So I had two very strong female role models that brought me into the game to begin with, and pretty much have to this day are still my role models. But I think, yeah, I mean, when you talk about trailblazers and advocates for sport, we're so fortunate in tennis. We've had the likes of the Billie Jean Kings and that 50 years ago, you know, gave up their careers to say they deserved equal prize money, equal opportunity. So I think we're fortunate in that sense, and obviously, you know, really striving for, you know, a lot of mixed teams competitions in our sport. We still do all of that stuff. So I think tennis does a great job. I think where I've seen, you know, where women are underrepresented, for example, is often at community level sport, you know, whether it be at club president or club community level. Women just do an amazing job, but it'd be great to see, you know, more of them get involved and be, you know, recognised for what they do, because I know for me, my mum and my nan, one, got me into tennis, kept me in tennis. They, you know, always did the canteen and that type of stuff, but I can tell you they would have been great presidents of the local tennis club as well. So I think, yeah, we've been fortunate in tennis, and I'm fortunate that, you know, in my women and girls role now, I see, and I'm at the front facing, as I said, with these women that are just doing such a fantastic job. So, yeah, I think tennis is doing a wonderful job, and I'm fortunate. And I think when you, like, in terms of my own experience, I've always had a positive experience, but I'm very well aware that not everyone has that same experience. So, yeah, I think that's why I'm passionate, because I get to speak to people that haven't walked into a club or an association and maybe felt as included as they would have liked. And how can I help you now? What can we do better? Or how can we make you feel more included? Or how can we make our clubs more accessible? And what can we do to make sport more inclusive? And that's why I love what I get to do now.
It's so important, I think, for athletes when they finish their careers to stay involved in some respect, because I know we've all benefited from people who come before us, but now you're all in a position where you are essentially advocates and role models, but it's sometimes a bit of a heavy crown. And I guess I wanted to check in with you and ask each of you, for example, Peter, how does that title of role model or advocate sit with you?
There's always a challenge, of course, because you wanna be able to do what you want to do, which is what I got into sports to do. And like, the role model comes almost naturally. And I think the way I've always worked it out, if it's always like stressing you a bit too much, it's okay to pull back. You know, you can't save the world by yourself, and you can kind of recruit people and get people together. But at the same time, I think we do have a responsibility to ourselves and to the wider community to, you know, to speak up. We're in a great position, we're in a great platform, and not many people are on a platform like that. And the change kind of starts with us. And if you can be vocal about it, you can actually bring more people and get more people interested in it, because we are in those positions to be able to speak. And yeah, you can only really do what you can, and always will.
Well, you're quite actively involved in giving back. You work with a couple of charities, Youth Activating Youth and the Sudanese Saturday School. I guess, how do you really enjoy that? Is it something you lean into? I imagine it's quite hard to fit in amongst all the travel and training.
Definitely, and I kind of saw the change, because it's like nothing new. You know, when I finished school, I used to go up to a little town, Leonora. This is before the Peter Bowl of Tokyo. Like, I've always did this work, and like all of a sudden, like you're fourth in the world, and now it's like more important. So, and that's why I said it's like I guess we now have a platform to kind of like advance that, and it's great. Like I do a lot of work with Indigenous students. I do a lot of work with Sudanese communities. It's something I'm passionate about personally, and I'll always continue to do that. And I guess in my position, it's important to show like everyone needs to do that. Like I remember going to Leonora for the first time, and I was racing against some kids, and I almost nearly lost, and they had like no shoes. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like if they had my teacher at school and they went to my school, I'm sure they'd be where I am, if not better. And that's like, you're just like, whoa, like we can do better.
Absolutely, and I think also why it's so important to have those champions in this space and advocates to help people get involved and show them that they should feel a sense of inclusion. Maddie, I wanted to ask you, how do you feel about the title of role model? Is it something that you've always lent into, or it comes with a heavy weight of expectation?
No, it is not. It's something I actively avoided for, I think, the first 2 Paralympics of my career, to be honest. It was something that I saw happening to everybody around me, where you do what you love, and for us that's sport, and then all of a sudden you're expected to do this other thing, which is so much harder than what we do out there on the track and on the road. And there is all this pressure, but we're not equipped to do it. And in Paralympic sport, what we kind of find is you end up in a disability advocacy space. And I was so certain that just because I had a disability, I didn't want to become that as the main part of my identity. So I very actively moved away from it for the first, I think, 5-6 years of my career. And then it becomes, you get to a point where you have this platform and you have this voice, and there is no one else that looks like you who has a platform and a voice. And so it does become a responsibility to do it, and not just do it, but to do it very, very well. And so for myself, I mean, it's a huge privilege to have that platform and to be able to be heard. That's incredible. But you want to be so sure that what you're doing is doing justice to the community that you're there representing, because you have a responsibility to do it. And if I look at my community, which is 18% of Australians who live with disability, Paralympic gold medalist does not represent them. So the fact that I'm the one that has the voice to be able to say that is actually not accurate of who I'm speaking for. And so it then becomes my responsibility to make sure I am amplifying the correct voices and educating myself. So outside of sport, you have to stay so up to date with what's actually happening in the community that you now have a responsibility to represent. And it's not my lived experience, like we were talking about before. We all have this privilege, and the fact that all of us are on this stage right now lends a light to how much privilege we have to be able to be having these conversations and to be being listened to. And so that's not the community I represent. We don't have voices. I think the minute you have a disability, whether you're born with it or acquire it, your autonomy of voice is almost stripped immediately, and that's through like medical systems, and that's through employment, and that's through everything. And so I'm not representative of that. And so as a role model, there is this enormous responsibility to make sure I am doing that accurately, because it's not something that comes naturally to me. So yeah, it's an enormous and very difficult responsibility that you kind of want to nail, because it's way more important than anything else that I do.
It is, but I think it's also important to acknowledge that progress is progress, and sometimes we might not always get it right. We might not be able to speak for everyone, but I think if our intentions are positive, then that's a really great place to be starting from. Casey, in terms of, I guess, that title of being an advocate, is it something that you've always kind of felt inclined to be a part of or to do, or when did you kind of take on that?
Yeah, probably similar to Maddie in terms of like, sometimes you don't want to be pigeonholed into a certain role as an advocate. And I think for me, I didn't really want to be pigeonholed into the LGBT. And then I thought, same thing, wow, I've got such a huge platform here to support a community that I've got a privilege that I can use my voice. So I remember, really finding my voice around the same-sex marriage vote in Australia as an Olympian, and in my role, I thought, now's my chance to really be an advocate for the community. And it was a big responsibility. It's a huge responsibility. You want to make sure that you're representing that community well. So that was, it was always a tough journey in that sense as well, and trying to find your feet there to make sure that you're doing it justice is hard. But yeah, so it's taken time, and same thing, like I feel so privileged to be sitting up here being able to speak, but I love advocacy work now. It actually drives me, and it's my biggest purpose now. So I love, as an athlete, you get up every day, you have a purpose, but now when you retire, sometimes that transition's hard, but when you find what your purpose is and what your passion is, and for me that's, now, women in sport, it's about advocating for everyone to have a place in sport. It's a pretty, great place to be. So I'm really fortunate that I found my feet post-career, and really some of the women and some of the people I've met in the tennis communities that I've visited have really made me feel and been probably some more career highlights than I had even as an athlete, because yeah, the power of sport is pretty amazing. So I've been very fortunate to get to do what I get to do now.
It sure is. It's very powerful. I did want to explore, I touched on earlier in terms of the trends. We're seeing progress in some areas and some of the numbers, and we're looking at our teams are heading in the right direction. But I wanted to touch on, I guess, where you see the state of Australian sport when it comes to that sense of inclusion. Are there any initiatives that you've seen launched recently that you just think, wow, that's incredible, you know, that wouldn't have existed 5-10 years ago? And maybe we can start with you, Hannah, because you work in the D&I space with the AFL. Is there anything going on that you've seen that's been a really positive change?
Yeah, certainly. I think the AFL, to their credit, in recent years have really upped their focus and energy and commitment across the D&I space. We've seen the evolution of the first women's professional competition, now in its 7th season, and hitting figures and data and spectator audience numbers that many people said would never happen.
Very quickly too. Very
quickly, and that is awesome. Like, I have 5 nieces, and they will all know that that is a sport that is available to them. And I was chatting to Casey earlier, we both played as little girls, and at the age of 9, tackling comes into the game, and oh, you're finished now because girls don't tackle and girls don't play football. So, you know, I reckon we would have made pretty good in the goal square.
Probably Masters League somewhere.
So look, I think AFL were very bold in that commitment to the professional league. They did it quite quickly. A lot of other sports said this is destined to fail, and they persevered. But what they did is they resourced appropriately. They had the trailblazers involved in the decision-making processes. Those conversations weren't made in silos by the same, blokes at the top that had led the male game for so many years. And without that, it would have failed. So it had the proper voices in the room. It engaged with the communities. And so I actually was very privileged in my previous role at AFL to be helping to drive that across New South Wales and ACT, and got to take a then step back. And how do we now look at the community grassroots level? Because they almost did a top-down approach with AFL where we launched the professional comp. And then we looked back at community football and went, so how does the female participation look in community football? And around the country, it looked pretty poor. So there were massive gaps. So, but what that professional comp gave us was the visibility. So for young girls, they now turned on the TV or could go and watch women playing this game. And so then when we offered these opportunities for them to come and play, they came in droves. Because, you know, we all want to play. We all want to be involved. We all want choice. So when I was told my only option in winter sport was netball, well, that's not choice. So it was great to be a part of that. And now we've sort of, while still being committed to those gender targets and goals, are also very actively sort of working towards broader inclusion initiatives across, you know, people with disabilities, whether they be physical, intellectual. We're heading off actually in November to South Australia for the National Carnival there. So taking, 16 players with intellectual disabilities over to play with every other state and country in a high performance environment. It's just awesome, and that is now having a similar ripple effect. We're having a lot of success setting up some disability inclusion programs. They look very different in different communities and around the country, but a lot of momentum. So I'm excited to see what direction that's heading.
That's fantastic to hear about.
Yeah, and the end goal there is, we might start with the Oz Kick, which is what we did as little kids. Having dedicated programs, but the end goal is that these players can actually go to a mainstream community football club and be safe, be included, be counted, and play at a level that they want to because they've chosen to be there.
And had that choice.
They've had that choice, yeah.
I'll throw it open to the panel now. What's happening in Australian sport that you're excited about, that you've seen in terms of initiatives? Feel free to jump in, anyone.
Well, we recently had our National Indigenous Tennis Carnival up in Darwin where Yvonne Goolagong was there, and obviously we've got Ash Barty as our National Indigenous Ambassador as well, which is amazing. So I know strategically I feel like most organisations now really have key targets or goals or things that they want to do in the different I&D spaces, which I think working on the other side I've really seen. So I think and having worked with other SSOs and NSOs and seeing what they're doing, I think it's a really key factor. And then also, obviously for us, we've got some blind and low vision tennis happening. The wheelchair tennis players are having amazing careers and draw sizes are getting bigger. And I think more resources need to be, you know, put into these type of spaces. And as Hannah was saying, especially at club level and grassroots. So those clubs, so any person can walk into a club and the club's equipped to deal with all of the different types of you know, groups that are coming in or people that want to play, and they're equipped to deal with that. So I think for me, you know, really important that all of our sports are looking at, you know, their strategies and what they're doing and what their outcomes are going to be and how they're going to measure that as well, so that there's some real key deliverables in regards to what each of the sports are doing, because we are all trying to do, each sport's trying to do a lot of the same thing, I guess, which is amazing. And I think that there's a lot of different opportunities out there, and it's great to collaborate with other sports and learn from each other. And yeah, but that's, I guess, yeah, we've seen some great things happening in tennis recently with, you know, extra resources and support going into those spaces, which is awesome.
Yes, those resources can go a long way.
Yes, absolutely.
Anything else to add in terms of what have you seen that's exciting? What about some of the organisations that you work with, Peter?
I think I work with a few, and there's a few things that's obviously really exciting. Like, I mean, there's an organisation in Brisbane, it's called Pushing Barriers, and it's simple as they just make sure the kids get to sport on the weekend because their parents can't take them there, and that makes a massive difference. I know I used to have to walk or catch a few buses, and when I didn't want to do that, I just stayed home. And my parents personally never told me to go to training. I always had to go by myself, not because they were very supportive, just they couldn't. And then on top of that, I think a more powerful change with the AFL. I did a bit of work with the AFL and in the diversity section, and they had a program for umpires, like trying to make it more multicultural. And I think that's super powerful, because not every kid wants to play AFL, but they love the sport. They grow up watching it, and they want to know there's different opportunities than just playing. With every sport, you got to include them everywhere. Like in the AFL, if you see more umpires that look like you, and you're like, man, where can I find these opportunities? And people kind of ask. And I think when we focus on like making sure it's not just the players, but everyone else is included, it'll make a very powerful change. And every sport, I think, needs to find a way to do that.
It's a really good point, actually, because when we're talking about sport, we're not just talking about the athletes and participation. We're talking about support staff, officials, administrators. I think it's really important that we focus this really broadly, because it's a community at the end of the day, and the community is a lot more broad than the athletes. As we all know, we've benefited from having some great people in our corners, no doubt. I did want to start looking forward. So we know that we still have a way to go when we're talking about seeing the diversity of the Australian population reflected in Australian sport. What would you like to see happen, change? I know it's probably a really long list, but if you could narrow it down to some really key initiatives that you think would make a really big difference, either in your own sport or even just in sport more broadly, what would you put forward to that? And Hannah, you're nodding. We'll go with you.
Question.
It's a huge question, and feel free to take it as blue sky as you like. You know, sky's the limit.
Anyone else?
That is a very heavy question, or heavy loaded question.
I think we shy away from quota spots and targets quite a bit in sport in general, but we know they work. And it's something that we've seen with women in business work be incredibly successful. And I feel like we run into this problem where once someone who's benefited from that gets into that position, we're able to kind of create much more change from the inside, because it's a systemic issue, it's a structural issue that really needs to change. And it's, you know, we kind of have this big focus on high performance and elite sport, but just the athletes, it's less in administration, it's less in grassroots, whereas we know that those, whether it's quota spots or targets, to kind of put like a more gentle, I guess, kind of spin on that, we know they work, but we shy away from them in sport so much because we want to believe that we got there on our own merit. And oftentimes when we have done that, we kind of say, well, I was able to do it, so therefore it's fine, and the next person should be able to as well. But it's not really that simple. And so I think implementing targets, not just in overall teams, like we talk about the numbers, you know, on the Paralympic and the Olympic team and how many women we had, and that's incredible. But that was such a specific decision-making process that happened. I know on the Paralympic side, that came from the International Paralympic Committee. There was quota spots, and we've changed events that are available. We've cut events, we've added events to make that happen. That didn't just happen because suddenly girls love sport more and now we love them playing more. It happened because we decided that this was really important and we're now going to do this. And we need to at grassroots levels as well, and we're not doing that. We're kind of just doing it at high performance. And implementing targets means you kind of need to then implement the structure to allow it to happen, not just saying this is our goal and we'll see how it goes. It really forced you to put in entire processes to make that happen. And I think we need to be far more deliberate with how we get true, authentic diversity in sport that isn't just focused on women or just disability. It needs to have an intersectional lens put on it, and it needs to be structured.
Thank you for jumping in there. That was an excellent answer. Huge round of applause.
I'd be happy to add to that, I think. And the more we can shift, and I say the word burden, but the burden of those with the lived experience, I'm sure you don't consider it a burden, but at times perhaps, to be that spokesperson and that advocate and that educator, actually the responsibility sits with us who have had the privilege. You know, the number of doors I've walked through that were just open and I didn't even realise it was a door, but that is a closed door for so many other people. It's actually taking that responsibility to learn what those closed doors are, and using what you have in your sort of realm to start opening a few more of those doors and being that really active ally, like getting educated, building your own capability and your own confidence to be able to go and work in these spaces and break down some of these barriers, so it's not always up to the individuals in these communities to be doing that.
I love that, Hannah, because it's so practical. It's something that we can all be doing, and that's what I really wanted today to be, really practical. And before I go to questions from the audience, I did just want to again throw it out there. If you had one piece of practical advice that people can walk out of here with today to start enacting change, they can, you know, from today with their families, with the places that they work at, or with their own sports, what's something that everyone can do today, as small as that may be?
Create really safe environments, like not just accessible environments, but welcoming environments. That makes an enormous difference. And say, you know, you want to get girls into sport, but you only have like one change room kind of a thing. That doesn't deter boys from joining, but does deter girls from joining. And then, you know, on the Paralympic sports side, if the venue you're training at is physically accessible, but it's like a back door through like a service elevator, then it's not actually independently accessible and it's not welcoming, and you don't feel like you belong in that space. And if you have a team sport for women but all your staff are men, like that's not a welcoming, safe environment. And those things need to shift drastically, because we say, hey, we want more girls, we have the funding or the resources, but here's your all-male like medical team. Like it's not actually a safe, welcoming environment. And all of those things, like, so our quota spots and our targets need to be to our staff as well, and very deliberate in how we create safe spaces for everyone to really kind of grow into that and yeah, have genuine, authentic diversity.
Excellent, inclusive environment. Casey, Peter, anything to add?
I guess if you can find a way to create opportunity, it'd be great. Whether you're, I guess, coaching, or if you see a kid that's loved the sport and is not rocking up, you might have to ask the question, have that conversation. It's like, why are you not rocking up? He might not have a lift there. His parents might not be able to afford it, and you might be able to know where they can apply for funding to make it easier for them. So if you can create that, and I guess it's just as easy. We just need to talk more and have more conversations to find out more about people and what they need to feel a sense of belonging and connection, and that only happens with easy as just having a conversation with someone.
Yeah, and I think something so practical, I think Hannah mentioned it, is about education. And if there's one thing that you can do, it's, you know, learn about different communities, or learn about different cultures, or learn so that you're confident as well when you're speaking to these people or these communities, that you're confident. So I think education is absolutely key, and have those conversations. So I think there's a piece of practical advice, it would be to, you know, sign up to some webinars or jump online, or even coming here today, you know, like being open to those conversations is certainly going to help. So that would be my probably piece of advice.
And I think then a next step from that is to be brave and start asking questions. So if you're looking at your club administration and it's all one demographic, just say, I've just noticed. Yeah. And perhaps we can talk about strategies for diversifying our governance structure. Just by planting that seed, you'd be surprised the ripple effect by asking a question, like by being brave enough to highlight it, put the spotlight on it. Too often, and for whatever reason, maybe because you don't feel confident, you don't have the knowledge and the capability behind you. But once you can build up that education, you can feel confident enough to actually just put your hand up, say, why haven't we, or why aren't we, or could we? And whether the actions that come out of that are small or huge, there will be significant ripple effects from that.
I love the common theme I'm picking up from all of that is to be brave. So to ask the question, to address the environment, to educate yourself, just be brave enough to take a step forward. On that note, I wanted to throw it out to questions from the audience for any of our amazing panellists today. Yes, Jane. You need the special microphone.
I think it's soft, so you can throw it. Okay. My question's in regards to the excitement that is coming up in 10 years' time. I appreciate there's a few Olympic and Paralympic cycles between now and then, and Peter and Maddie, maybe you will get to 5 and 7 of your Olympic and Paralympic journeys, who knows, and maybe we'll have some returns from retirement.
It's never too late.
But I'm really interested in quite a selfish answer of what you think utopia looks like. Like, what is the Brisbane Games going to be a platform for under the lens of inclusion? The legacy of it, 10 years beyond that. What do you think utopia for you personally looks like?
For me, if I were to hear someone try and say Olympic and mix it up and say Paralympic, which that happens to us every day, that would be my dream. That would be I know that we've kind of gotten it if someone goes to describe the Olympics and slips up and says Paralympics. That's how you know they're genuinely being viewed as the same. And if we're talking about, our top athletes, say, our Jess Foxes, we're not saying, the women's kayak, women's canoe. We're saying, canoe, we know when we think of Jess as our kind of person. I think when those kinds of things are interchangeable, right now we think of sport and we often think of able-bodied men. We think about professional sport all the time and we don't automatically kind of go to women or Paralympians, and that's not what we think about when we think about athletes. And so when we're kind of having conversations and we're automatically gravitating towards our Taylor Harrises when we're talking about it and those kinds of things, that's when I think we'll kind of really know when it's in language and in conversations that we'll know we've kind of actually nailed that.
I guess for me, in 10 years' time, I think Australia's got a wonderful sporting culture and it's already multicultural, but in 10 years' time, I think we can develop so many more athletes in any sports. I see the basketball team, and it's it could be so more multicultural. And I want it to be by the time we get to Brisbane, it's just normal that it's multicultural. It's not a big deal. It's just normal. And if I get asked, for me personally, if I get to ask the question, I feel because I'm Australian, I've lived here most of my life, everyone else in the team should be asked the same question. There's no difference.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I mean, when you look at the data, I think nearly half of our population have at least one, if not both parents born overseas. So if we're to be, truly reflective of society, how great would it be that our team is as multicultural as that?
I am going to jump in with a question from someone watching online, fellow Olympian Yusuf Abdi, who has a question for you, Peter. Yusuf would like to know, are you friends with other runners from other countries who have the same background as you?
Yeah, actually, but I have multiple backgrounds, so it's kind of hard. I was born in Sudan, so my mom is north, my dad is south, and I've lived in Egypt for 4 years. So yeah, I've got a bunch of Egyptian friends. I speak Arabic. I've got a bunch of Qatari friends that are born in Qatar but they're Sudanese, and I've got a bunch of South Sudanese friends in different countries. And everyone asks where are you from? I just say I'm a global citizen.
Wonderful. We'll take another question from the audience, although I think you might need to wait for the special talk box.
So my question is about mixed gender team sports. Like, I know that in athletics we have the mixed 4x4 at both the World Championships and at the Olympics, and in tennis we have mixed doubles at like the French Open, Australian Open, US Open and Wimbledon. Do you guys see the potential for mixed gender sports at a high level? For example, like water polo, would there be like at the Olympics? Would you see that there would be potential for that in the future?
I'm all for mixed team. We've seen the evolution of mixed teams competition over the years, and I think we all love the swimming, the mixed team swimming. Athletics did a great job, I think, of doing some mixed teams competitions, and yeah, I think the evolution of mixed teams competition, we're going to see more of it, and I'd love to see more of it. So where possible, I know in tennis we're always looking for more opportunities to, bring the men and the women together. So yeah, I think other sports are catching on to the fact that there's a really, it's a great optic to see the men and the women competing at the highest level and all the way through to grassroots, I think, competing together. So I'd like to see more of it.
Yeah, it's a really great question. Coming from surf lifesaving, we had mixed, the sports has had and still has mixed events for years and years and years, and the mixed double ski was like always my favourite. It was a very hotly contested event at the Australian Championships, and it would be an opportunity to actually jump on a double with like a male Olympic paddler, because women were new to paddling and surf lifesaving, and before I was even in a kayak myself, I could jump on the back of a surf ski with a paddler who'd been crossing over into kayaking and going to Olympic Games, and that for me certainly set this like goal, this flame of like, this is some of the opportunities that mixed team sport can unwrap. And kayaking, or putting my paddling hat on, canoe kayak in the flat water, have started introducing it at the World Championships. And actually the paddlers who have been able to bring home some medals for us are those that are also surf ski paddlers and have been doing it for years. So, taking down the European competitors who tend to be really dominant in our sport, the Aussie mixed crews are taking it back to them because we've grown up doing it in the surf. So I think it's a really powerful and exciting space that I hope continues to develop.
Yeah, I think where we can, we should. So I think I was in Doha 2019, and one of my friends came to watch, and he had no idea what was going on the track. But as soon as the mixed relay came on, it was like the most fun he had. Mm-hmm. And I think it creates so much entertainment and excitement for the crowd, and that way it draws more people into it. So I think it's a great idea where you can. I definitely don't see why not.
I think it's a wholehearted yes.
I do think, though, we have to be careful, because there are still many countries where people are persecuted based on their sexuality and their gender. And so then if we're going to be setting an expectation that we can come together at a world level, whether it be World Championships, World Cups or Olympic Games, that we're not actually creating unsafe experiences for people, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it's a really important point. I have another question from an online viewer. Catherine Conity, apologies if I mispronounced that, has asked, and feel free anyone to jump in, how can we help in low socioeconomic areas? And I assume she means in terms of getting anyone and everyone involved in sport and creating that sense of inclusion.
You go, Pete.
I think I guess to use the schools as an example, like we found like there's like private schools, there's public schools, and you found a way to get educated. And I think in sport we should be able to implement something like that, where everyone has that opportunity, whether it's small or whatever it is, but as long as they're given that opportunity, kind of the equipments, everything like that, I think we need to implement something like that, private versus public, whatever. Just give everyone kind of an opportunity to jump into the sport.
Yeah, I think schools is a great way, and I think through grants, and there's obviously a lot of states that have grant and funding opportunities. I know through some of the programming that we've done, being able to provide the low socioeconomic areas with an opportunity to get, some support, whether that be through equipment or a whole term of sport, and then just slowly getting them into the sport and helping them financially is crucial. And there's ways, you can go about doing that. So there's plenty of opportunities out there. So yeah, I've seen it work in tennis in regards to some of those different communities where we've been able to provide a free term of tennis for some of our some of those areas, and then we've kept it ongoing, and then they've been able to engage in sport. So I think just trying to think creative and outside of the box of how you can engage, because as Pete said many times, everyone deserves an opportunity. So really just trying to think outside the box to find ways to give them an opportunity any way possible. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I know just the other thing was through our racket roadshow with the tennis, it's amazing when you get a piece of equipment in, you know, I remember getting, you know, the AFL, they send out the pack and you get your AFL or just a piece of equipment, kids hitting tennis balls up against the hitting wall, and that things like that just are so powerful as well. So.
Yeah, and I think there's a responsibility of our government as well to be providing subsidised programs and initiatives. I mean, we've seen them roll out the Active Kids program, which I believe targets quite younger age group in school. Yeah. But I think we can be brave and think outside the box and consider how else programs like that might exist in areas that are, have a greater, lower socioeconomic demographic.
In Paralympic sport, because the equipment is so incredibly expensive, we sort of automatically fall into that when no one has access to equipment, and so we almost have like a library catalogue of everything that we have. So Louise, who's my coach, she also runs the development group on Saturday mornings, and we just have race chairs that we've all donated after using them that kind of just stay there, and they're kept safe and anyone is welcome to use them. They don't belong to anybody. But I think we're able to then provide ill-fitting race chairs, admittedly, to every kid. But I raced my first Paralympic Games in a borrowed race chair because there is just no access to equipment. And so to kind of be able to have that on offer, and yes, it won't be perfect, but you can get into it. And when you're in a position where, you know, race chairs we're talking like at least $4,000 for your most basic kind of setup for a kid, and you cannot ask a family to do that when your kid is not even committed to, you know, turning up kind of a thing. But it means there is access. And so I think in any sport that requires equipment, kind of maintaining that and having that specifically maintained, not just, you know, relying on charity for individuals, but there being a specific way to actually maintain and then redistribute equipment is incredibly important.
I think that's a really great piece of practical advice for anyone tuning in that's part of a sport. How can you level the playing field when it comes to access to equipment or the daily training environment? I'll take another question from the audience now, if there is one. Yeah, I think it's soft. There you go.
So in a past life, I was an educator and I worked with obviously a lot of children, and you know, we would go over to the athletics carnival or swimming carnival or whatever it is, and there were so many children that wanted to have a go, but they were so scared that, you know, they would fall over on the track, or they would false start off the blocks, or that they would make a bit of a fool of themselves. And so many children, I saw so many that didn't actually participate because they were so scared of something like that happening to them. Would you guys have any advice for how to sort of knock down that final barrier that you're almost giving yourself to just get in there and have a crack at it?
Yeah, I guess practice.
Yeah.
And no, like I don't say that in that way, but like when you go to school carnival, make sure at school they're actually doing the hurdles they're doing in classes before, because then like for example, if I go and you just chuck me in a pool and I didn't do any training, I wouldn't want to jump in there. Like no way.
Yeah,
So
it builds confidence.
like you got to build your confidence. You got to give them those opportunities before getting into like the athletics carnival and being competitive, because I think sport should remain fun, and keeping it fun, and then like competition should be a choice like later on. So if you're at school, you have sports classes, they need to be practicing different and having a go at different things, and then when they come to the carnival, they can kind of select the event and what they want to do.
As well, it's really important to almost kind of provide like the structure leading into it to then be able to do it, because, and I'm not sure what your experiences were with this, but we find, for example, like girls are the ones that aren't competing in sport after a certain age, and I would imagine that was a similar kind of, it was mostly girls that weren't doing it, and that is such a huge problem, because it's not just, that's not just girls not running, that's, you know, we know that sport at a really early age is what then links to employment opportunities later on. We know women in high power decision making jobs participated in sport in some capacity when they were younger. And so we're having decisions made for women now by people that aren't women. And a lot of that is linked to confidence and security in sport at a younger age. And so when we notice there is a lack of participation, it's often girls, it's also people with disabilities. And so that's what we're finding, that trajectory to employment and decision making and impactful roles, it's almost a straight line. Like those two things are incredibly linked. And so when we're saying, you know, we need to prepare kids to want to actively participate in this, there is the kids not participating, it's a very disproportionate way that it affects our then women. And so, I think providing really safe, structured environments where, you do the sport growing up and you practice it, and then by the time you actually do it, like it's almost, you're more comfortable doing it, because the importance of that is actually enormous, far outside of sport and health, and it's huge.
Yeah, and I think I was just going to add, and this is where I feel like the volunteer community, particularly community sport, is so important. And having a daughter that's 6 years old, she has done 2 seasons of AFL now, and I know that she's gone back numerous times because there's this wonderful female, and this is where it comes back to volunteers and female and role models, men or women, but she goes back because she's got this wonderful parent that coaches the team and does what we just spoke about, creates a safe environment, spends an extra 5 minutes at the end, come and have a kick with me or come and have a hand pass, and that just creates that sense of feeling like they really want to then engage and participate. So we really, particularly at grassroots level, like our volunteers are so important to be able to make sure that the kids coming into the sport feel like they can participate. And this is why I'm a big fan of, I'm a big fan of, not creating too many highly competitive sports until they get to a certain age. And I know that's always a topical subject, but because through my 3 kids now, I see it firsthand, the impact of them just participating. And then sure, when they get to a certain level, you do go on a high performance pathway, but participation and getting kids just involved in sport and confident is absolute key.
From a practical perspective, like you might, for those individuals who are nervous because of X, Y, and Z, go and create a scenario or an environment where they can work towards overcoming those fears. So, for example, back when I was in South Australia and they introduced the surf ski for women, so that was only a fairly recent decision. Like, I'm 30 and I was already a teenager before that happened. So we were getting on a surf ski and getting absolutely pummeled by the ocean. We didn't grow up doing it. And the men would sit back and laugh, how good is this? Let's go watch the women's final. They're all gonna, absolutely cop it. And you'd hear that on the beach. So the younger girls back in South Australia when I was there didn't want to go near a surf ski. I thought, well, that's not okay. So we would do a female-only surf ski session down the coast in the surf, have a laugh, had heaps of fun, had a feed afterwards, and built our confidence up that way. So then we could return to the environment feeling empowered and confident.
Making it fun.
And making it fun.
A really important point there from all of your answers. Now we've got time just for one last question, and this has come from Paralympian Tasman Colley for you, Maddie. In your ideal sporting world, would the para athletes and able-bodied athletes be competing together in integrated events like the Com Games, or even in mixed handicap races, or separately like the Paralympics and Olympics?
This is a divisive question. I think separate. Purely because I think both the Paralympics and the Olympics need to be viewed as equal. We're not talking about do we combine the Olympics with the Paralympics, we're saying do we combine the Paralympics with the Olympics. So we, as Paralympians, actually lose out in that integration. And we've seen it at Commonwealth Games, and I think on the surface that looks really beautiful, where we see our athletes with disabilities and our non-disabled athletes competing on the same team, and that's great. But I compete in 4 events, and 2 of mine are at a Commonwealth Games. And our silver medalist from Birmingham just gone, she doesn't really race the event that was offered. So she was our former world record holder over the 400 and the 800, but we would never have seen that happening at a Commonwealth Games. We don't see her at her best because the environment doesn't let us see her at her best. And so I think, given the logistical nightmare that combining the 2 games would be, we're talking a 4-week process, and the village is going to be huge, and the village is a nightmare on a good day. It's just that's a mess. That is a catastrophe waiting to happen. But if we genuinely view them as equally, that's what needs to change. If we got to have 2 incredible sporting events back to back, 2 weeks apart, every 4 years, that's incredible. And I think we kind of got a glimpse of what that would look like with Tokyo, where we were all kind of at home while it happened. And I think everyone did tune in. We had the most views. The Paralympics were the most views that it's ever had in Tokyo just now. And I think the Olympics probably wasn't too different because we were all stuck in our houses. And I watched the Olympics from here in Sydney, and I remember what that felt like. And to know that we had that same impact with the Paralympics 2 weeks later is incredible. And that's what we need to see more. We get to have 2 incredible sporting events. And so we can keep it that way. We just need to invest equally in the two, and that's more what needs to change. And in some moments, like Com Games, we do have an integrated program. That's great. I'm not saying let's take that away. Let's keep doing things like that. But I think at our benchmark events, you need to let the Paralympics be the Paralympics, and it's an incredibly powerful event. And let's keep that as is. Let's keep that growing rather than trying to change it as it's growing.
Well done, that was a big one. A really great way to end, and that does bring the session to a close. I wanted to say a really heartfelt thank you to Casey, Maddie, Hannah and Peter for just contributing your insights and your experience today. I think it was really valuable for everyone tuning in. Thank you to all of you and to everyone tuning in online. Your involvement has already made a difference, and the fact that we're having this conversation is a really positive thing. So get out there and be brave, and ask the questions, and take it upon yourself to become more educated and more inclusive, because I think we all really want to see sport mirror the Australian population in terms of diversity, and be an inclusive environment for all. So thank you.